Oh, hey. Riverside now has a picture-in-picture mode.
Hmm.
So when I look away, well, now it's not happening. Whatever. Never
Oh
mind.
yeah, it did say something about that. For me, it like when I logged in, it said that I didn't have like the resources or whatever to run picture in picture. So
It
I
did it
don't
for
even
me.
know what that
Yeah,
means.
it did it for me once, and then was like, "Nah, we want to protect your video quality." Studio chat, live stream chat.
All right, got the link.
Scott Santon's social. All right. Yeah, I'll just retweet you on everything. Oh, he's live. Scott is live.
All right, shared out the Blue Sky link. All right, shared on both Blue Sky and X.
Okay.
All right. Welcome to the Basic Income Show. I am here with my co-hosts, Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth. I'm, of course, Scott Santons, and we'll be talking about the latest in basic income developments in the U.S. and around the world. And let's go. What we usually like to start off with is a new version of our theme song that always uses the same lyrics. And here's today's version.
This song is AI generated, loved it or hated. No one was compensated. One more artist wonders where their money will come from. One more example of the need for basic income.
Nice.
Yeah, that was a fun one. That one was in the style of West Coast hip hop, is what I chose.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what to talk about first? Plenty of things to talk about, and I think what I want to talk about first is something that I haven't seen covered anywhere else, and I did post about it on Blue Sky today, telling people that we would talk about it. So, what that is that Kamala Harris went to an AI conference and decided to just on her own, she mentioned universal basic income. So here, let me bring
Just
up
in time.
that news. Okay. So everybody sees that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right, so yeah, I was just surprised to see this. I wish I had some video, but you know how it is. Like, either it requires someone recording it on their phones, you know, in the audience, and I'm sure at some point they'll release like the full talk from this, but it's not available yet, as far as I know. But I just thought it was really interesting, and I just happened to come across it with like someone who was attending it mentioned that she'd mentioned it, and then I was able to track down like a transcript kind of what she said about this. So here's the relevant segment from like her 45-minute appearance there. And she was talking about the impact of AI on work. And so here's what she said. Our identity in many ways is connected to the job we do. She said, quickly adding, I, for example, right now am unemployed. Then the audience lulled. There are some people with a very big bully pulpit who have been very dismissive on this point, saying, get over it, it's happening. She continued, let's start with a little more empathy and a little more respect for the righteous fear that people have about losing their everything. Instead, Harris urged them to consider the people not in the room. Can you articulate your vision of the future in a way that other people can see themselves? She said, excuse my language, don't bullshit me. I need to see myself in your vision of the future. Proposals to replace paychecks lost to AI with a universal basic income scheme don't cut it. Quote, you know what people hear when you talk about UBI? Harris said, you want to take my job and put me on welfare. So that discussion there, I think, is very pertinent, and I think we should talk about that because, I mean, clearly, like, first of all, I don't even know if she's even speaking of it from a positive angle, and she like thinks that it's a good idea, or if she doesn't like it, and this is like kind of the reason why, or if she like wants people to like it, but then she's saying, look, if we're actually going to do this, then you need to actually.
Right, she's
talk about
punting it onto what other people hear and what other people think.
It's a fair point. I mean, it is. I think that kind of is a pretty good characterization of what people hear when they hear people.
Yeah.
People that are sort of, at the reins of the AI, monster that's taking off, right? Like that this proposal of like, we'll just need universal basic income. That'll take care of it. But I think that punting is the thing that she's calling out. I think there's some room in there to to better articulate how it would actually work, and maybe that's what we could do.
I mean, that's what we've been struggling with for a long time, where people who are so used to welfare being like either or, welfare or job, not understanding. Like, that's the common misconception people just immediately go to because that's what they're used to. And so she's not directly claiming that misunderstanding. She's saying that's what people hear. So it's a little bit of a punt, but it's also true. She's actually not wrong, but she's taking a very strong stance.
She's not doing anything to change that perception in this.
Right. Yeah. Here. She's not wrong, but
it's also, and that's what we're working to fix, right? With a lot of what we do. It's also funny to hear her as the Democratic Party leader, latest one or whatever, talking about we need to like really validate where people are at and be serious about like acknowledging that people are really feeling like they're losing stuff, and we have to, encompass their fears and their needs, because the Democratic Party line, especially this time, for a while has been, you guys are crazy, the economy's awesome, shut up, you're just making up lies. And that's not a really good campaigning tactic. And she's saying essentially the opposite. She's saying what I was saying to the Democrats, to no one listening, but for a long time. So I don't know. Is it a change of heart? Is she no longer under somebody's direction, or is it disingenuous? Is it lip service? It's hard to know what to think.
I would say that, and I wrote about this when I wrote my article about Elon Musk too, and with him talking about like universal high income, and it's like, it's kind of like this built-in kind of problem with talking about basic income from the perspective of the elimination of jobs. It's like people think, well, if I lose my job, let's say I'm earning $50,000 a year, And if I lose my job and I get basic income and it's $15,000 a year, well, then I'm screwed. And like I get a $35,000 pay cut and I'm unemployable because all AI and robots are doing everything. And so that's not a good idea. You know, like, why would I want that? You're giving me a horrible deal. And so like the sale of, you know, basic income, like people in the tech world talking about basic income, if you're talking about it as like a job replacement, then yeah, people aren't going to be happy about that. Especially if you're talking about it as an, oh, we're going to get rid of 100% of jobs. You know, like humans will not be employable at all. And that's not true. Like, we're not going to eliminate 100% of jobs. It's just, that's way too extreme. It's wrong. Like, we will displace people from jobs. It'll be maybe 25% or more. Like, it'll be significant and it'll be painful. But it's not like there's going to be no jobs and there's not going to be no new jobs created. But the displacement is the issue. And we want to make sure that we have like an updated safety net in order to help people through this and to make sure that people benefit from automation.
And there are some luxury space communist types who like want to jump immediately to the post-work world. And they are generally unrealistic, I think, for the moment. But yeah.
Yeah, it's like we don't know what's going to happen, but we do know that, you know, for sure in the immediate term, like the immediate 5-10 year term, we're going to be experiencing some displacement, but we don't know to what degree. And what we don't want to do is, you know, have 20 million people or 30 million people or whatever, like funneled through the existing system where they have to apply for, you know, unemployment insurance and SNAP and WIC and TANF and, you know, whatever else. And they may or may not get these things. Like, that's a terrible idea. So we want a system where everyone actually has that floor, and we acknowledge the fact that, you know, it's temporary. Like, the floor is permanent, but their need for it as an only kind of income source is temporary. Like, they will find another job. They'll either they'll go back to school, they will train up doing something else, to learn something else. They'll find another job, and, you know, hopefully they'll be happier with that job than with the job that they had. But also, you know, we can't, it's a reality that automation is here. So some people are going to lose their jobs and they're not going to be as happy with the next job. But like, you know, that's always been true with automation, where I'm sure people had jobs that maybe they enjoyed that they were automated out of. And, you know, there are people who are happier with their next job, people who are less happier with their next job. But, you know, that's the reality of the situation. And we just want to make sure that they're not, you know, they don't fall into poverty as a result of this, that they're not punished, you know, by this welfare system.
Ruined. Yeah, beyond repair. Like,
and also,
a certain amount of like losing your livelihood that, you know, you got to leave room for, but to be driven to the point where you're so far gone that you can't actually find that next thing to do, like that. Any sort of hope of economic recovery for yourself and your household is gone because you've lost this job. So that's what Universal
and
is saying. Like, we're expecting there to be some disruption, some sort of some variability in how much how successful you can be at any given time.
And as Conrad was saying earlier too, like, it's important that when she says welfare, and she's right about people worrying that they're going to be in welfare, that we have to emphasize that there is a difference between welfare and UBI. And part of it is what we just said, as far as, you know, the ridiculousness of applying for it and the potential of not getting it. And of course, the stigma of being on that. Like, people worry, I don't want to be on welfare because that's bad. That says bad things about me. So there's that stigma attached to welfare. But also, existing welfare says, all right, well, if you get a job, then you lose the welfare and you just have the job. So that has to be emphasized too, is that people will have their basic income, they will find another job, and then that will add to their basic income instead of replacing it like the existing system does, in which case people can be no better off, in a job than versus welfare. Like that's important too.
But also, to be fair, a little bit to Sam Altman, like he is like thinking about universal basic income in a very serious way, and is conducting studies, and has been a pretty big proponent of like exploring the possibilities there. So I don't know if she's I don't think she's directing her comments at him specifically.
Yeah, I think she's just talking about it from the kind of typical Silicon Valley angle, which is like saying no one will have jobs, which is kind of, like a marketing, like Silicon Valley is saying, look, we're creating something so awesome that none of you will have to work anymore. In which case, if none of us are going to work anymore, then yeah, we're going to need like an $80,000 UBI or something, like it should be very large. So like from that marketing angle, it requires like a high UBI, but realistically, we're not going to see that level of disruption anytime soon. That you'd have to have a massively super intelligent AGI. And even then, we're still going to have jobs. There's still going to be demand for human labor regardless, because people will want human labor regardless. And that's what creates jobs. But yeah, I think that's like that kind of marketing is part of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of that is it's getting lost in the message of like you'll be able to work on better things is kind of lost in the whole way that the way that AI is being communicated to people. Like you're not really seeing it like that, and the immediate response is usually like there goes my job, right? Instead of like there goes my job and here comes a better one, right? Like it's not seen that way, because I think she's right. Yeah, the vision for what this actually means to us as people working on making cool stuff is kind of lost, right? And so, yeah.
So I want to pause for 1 sec because I've been a little checked out dealing with the tech thing with Strat here. So Scott's coming in way louder than Josh for me, and he said I should do my voice too, but basically Josh is coming in a lot softer.
Yeah,
I think I hear Scott coming in pretty loud, like blowing out that mic. Strat, am I coming in about the same as Scott, or in between them, or what? Give time for him to respond.
Check 1 2.
Like when Scott talks, I have to take the headphones off, and when Josh talks, I have to put them back on.
It's that bad. Okay.
I can back it away a bit.
I hear a little bit of reverb from Scott. It's not too bad.
So Strat, Scott loudest, Conrad medium, Josh low. So Josh turn it up, Scott turn it down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this better?
I think so, and you don't have to emphasize things very hard at all. Just know you're coming in very clear.
I'm curious. It might be a new driver on my end, just because it popped up under like a different name on my system. So I don't know. As far as like why that's the case, it's not like there's any volume switch. It just seems to be a different driver.
Mine has a volume switch I can set, so if I get too loud, I can just turn it down. But yeah. All right.
All right. Do I sound different now at all?
Oh yeah, you're coming in a little stronger. Strat says Scott's good. I think we're at a better spot now. Speaking of which, Strat, there's been a lot of comment action today. Strat at the beginning said, "I know the stream isn't widely watched," which I dispute. There's already 8 people watching at this moment. What are you talking about, Strat? And but he says you're doing highly valuable work running these regular streams. Thanks. Thank you. It's good to be validated. Yeah. And there's a lot of comments about what we were talking about. One that was interesting, Wolf Gold says, why is there stigma to welfare? Oh, because right-wing corporates have spent decades making it so. And I think there's an element of that. But I think it's really inevitable in a system that picks and chooses and separates people. Like it says, you need something, you don't need something. The stigma is inevitable. Like this kind of touches into some like personal therapeutic realizations I've been having lately. Like as we move through different phases of our projects, I'm starting to finally deal with like some bad tendencies I've developed. Like I think I've developed this need to prove to myself and others that I don't need so much goddamn help all the time, because I spent the last 10 years asking for help. Basically, I'm a fundraiser. And so it's sort of debasing and degrading. And it's like, I want myself and my parents to think like I'm a gainfully employed human and all that. And people started thinking differently when we got a couple big grants, but I was the same person. It's this weird thing where I had this need that had developed to like show that I am independent and all of that stuff. And I don't need all this help, even while also writing articles all the time about how it's silly. Like we are all interdependent. It's funny to like this kind of lives within us, the need to prove to each other that we're all like chipping in. Like I think this is part of at the basis of why UBI actually works, in my opinion, is nobody wants to be a mooch. Everybody wants to matter, or everyone wants to be a positive person in the world. And like when they check out or become apathetic, it's because I don't know, I feel that they've basically been squashed. But everyone wants to be proud of themselves. You know, I think that's pretty universal. So when you have a program that says you are needy, so you're going to get help, it's like saying, as opposed to what, right? And that label sucks, just at a deep psychological level. So if we have programs that are universal, it's like, no, we're all on the same playing field. There is no like, oh, I am in this category versus that category.
Yeah, I think that it does really tie to the just world fallacy. You know, like we like to talk about. I think a lot of stuff ties back to that. And so now, if you believe that people who are doing well because they deserve it and are making the right decisions, and those who are doing poorly, who are living in poverty, they're there because they're making bad decisions, and thus they deserve like to be punished by poverty. People think that it's like kind of protective. It's that, that's never going to happen to me. I'm not going to be in poverty because I'm a good person making good decisions. I don't have to worry about that stuff. That's for them. And as long as you think that, when we build this means tested target system around that only goes to people when they're in, immense need, if they're able to jump through the hoops, then you create this system where if you need help, then it's like saying you're a bad person. Like you were like actually acknowledging that. It's like that's why there's something called like the welfare take-up problem, where people, even who need help, refuse to actually apply for help, because it's like acknowledging that they are a bad person and like they made mistakes by needing help. And so that's the problem. That's the stigma that comes from this targeting. It will always occur from targeting because of that. Like, it reminds me of a story from there was something went viral years ago where like a woman was using her EBT card to like buy food at Walmart or something. And like the woman behind her like gave her like a lot of shit about like using that card, because it was like, you're taking money from me and you're buying this stuff, and she's like judging her based on what she's getting, and she's like judging her for actually utilizing that help. It's like that, like you said, it's like, oh, you're a moocher or whatever. And so it really divides us. If you're not getting something, then what someone is getting something, they are getting it from you. And yeah, you have to make sure that universality prevents that. Like it destroys that stigma.
And Wolf Gold in the comments is saying, so socialist paradise of the UK here, plus disabled. I'm disabled and benefits. Effectively a mooch, as my physical stuff and meds make me unemployable, but I don't feel any stigma. I've got a decent support network. I'm fairly flippant towards life in general, but I do get that other people feel differently. And so, yeah, people are different, how they process these things and how they maintain their feeling of self-worth and things. But if you look at the numbers of all of these programs and the percentages of the population that they're supposed to support that actually get the support, like the very most successful ones approach 50%, and that's like food stamps. And, TANF gets to 10% or whatever. Scott's got the numbers, but like, there is a very large population among whom it's not just that they were disqualified or haven't gotten it yet or ran out of the temporary support. It's that they don't have the stomach to sign up for it because it feels like they're quitting or admitting failure. And why do we need to put people through that when it is a part of the system we've designed that people will need help? It's inevitable. There's no way around it. So why do we need to make people feel like shit about it?
I do wonder how much of it is an American stigma, though. Like,
More so.
and and I often have a hard time like peeling apart like what is this sort of cultural paradigm that I personally am stuck in, and how much is sort of like a reality of just human behavior, right? Like, and I think like I think you're anywhere, any society or any group of people, you're always going to have, I think, like this sort of stigma against those that are not contributing, right? Because that's just, if you're trying to survive in a small group of people, like you watch Survivor or anything like that, like there's always the person who isn't pitching in is kind of the outcast and is the first to get voted off, right? Like, but so I think no matter what, you're going to get that. But I think in America, it's emphasized even more, this like this divide between who's pitching in and who's not.
But then it's like this absolutist measure, whereas if you're in a healthy family or on a team or something, or if you're just in general, like the most you should expect from someone is their best, right? Like if people are doing what they can, then good. That's where we want to get people. Not you have to do as much as this person or in the same way or add to the GDP in the same way. It's like if you're doing your honest best to contribute to the extent you can, there shouldn't be any shame there. That's actually very laudable, for anyone to be really trying. And that's what we want.
I also want to emphasize too, like contribution. Every time I hear that, it's like in quotes in my head. It's like so much of contribution is defined by paid work, but like clearly there's tons of volunteering going on and unpaid work going on, and that should be considered a contribution. But like it's not part of GDP, and it's not part of what people like to stigmatize people for, saying like, oh, you're being a moocher because you're not doing this, and like ignoring the fact that maybe they're caring for someone.
Right. You don't get the credit for the great work, which is usually the better work that you do that is unpaid, which is part of what went into my deep abiding like insecurities of like, I worked on these projects for about 4 years without getting paid. And so all my family was just worried about me. And in the eyes of the government, I was like not a taxpayer. But we were building and working and fighting as hard as we could to try to do as much good as we could. But we still felt like shit about ourselves, And that's true for a lot of people volunteering or caregiving or whatever. It's like, if we only measure people based on effect on the GDP or the number in your bank account, then we're really selling the potential for humanity short.
Yeah. So the next piece of news I want to cover is just an update on the states that are trying to ban basic income pilots or programs. And so here's like the current updated list that I just posted about recently. So I posted on Blue Sky that they've successfully banned these programs in Arkansas, South Dakota, Iowa, and Idaho. And they're now currently trying to get them banned in Texas, West Virginia, Arizona, Montana, and Kansas. And they've tried and failed in Wisconsin and Mississippi. So that's because these are
targeted.
So these
Is
are
that the main reason?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I would say that you're seeing these in deep red states, and so the newest ones, that like 3 new ones came out just like in succession, and that was Kansas, Montana, and Florida are the ones that just recently put up bills for this. And each of these, I mean, there's state by state, they're mostly the same thing because they're mostly being put forward by the same organization, which is we've talked about before, the Foundation for was it Foundation for Government Accountability, FGA, is really the main organization behind this, where they're just like putting pre-done like bills, pre-written bills in the hands of state legislatures that are controlled by Republicans, and they're just saying, here, pass this bill. And then there's some adjustments made here and there, but they're mostly the same bills. And it's all about preventing cities really within those states doing any of these kinds of programs using public dollars. So you can't ban a pilot that's using private dollars, because that's a charity doing just whatever a charity wants to do. But what they can do is ban a city from doing any kind of program. And their logic is that it's anti-welfare stuff. It's saying you can't use government dollars and give that to someone, because they're going to waste it. You have to have conditions attached, and we have welfare for these things, so don't do these programs. And to your point, there's certainly an element of that where it doesn't help that, let's say, a program is focused on some marginalized group that conservatives in those states may particularly, let's say, dislike. So maybe a program is focused mostly on Black people, or maybe like in California, it's focused on like trans people or something. And therefore it's really easy in those states to be like, we can't do that. We're not going to do that program. And maybe they'll say it's because of the targeting is the issue. But I think the main thing is just the no work requirements, and cash to spend on anything is their main problem.
Yeah. Is there also, so government dollars is a big one. One of the ones we're hoping to use commingle to swoop in and avoid those bans. Is there also, are there pilots that are strictly through charitable dollars that are also seeing legal challenges because they're targeted? Like, is that another? I feel like I remember hearing that it wasn't even a government program, but like you could lose your charitable status if you limited it to a certain section of like.
I think that's a newer
demographic.
I think it's a newer concern. Like, I remember. I have to look this up, but I think in California there was a program focused on trans people, I think at San Francisco, and I don't remember if that was utilizing public dollars or if it was fully private funded. I'd assume that it was public dollars, just because so many of these programs used ARPA funding.
Right.
And so that was, the COVID stimulus, and then lots of localities got to use it for all kinds of things. And so I think that was an example of that. But
I mean, there is an argument to make that any single charitable dollar is like fractionally a public dollar if they're getting a tax break. So I that could be a next level that comes is you can't do any targeted basic income pilots. You can't do any basic income pilots and get a tax break, because we don't want to give you a tax break for that, Yeah,
with the new administration, basically anything that smells like DEI, you could lose funding for that. It could be frozen. Maybe we haven't seen this yet, but maybe they'll start threatening 501c3 statuses. There is potential there for programs for charitable programs to actually be stopped or frozen or something because of these issues. But for the most part, these state bills are really just about public programs and stopping those programs from either going on or maybe they haven't even had a program yet and they're just trying to prevent it in advance. But I've written an article about that before, about the FGA and the billionaires they're funded by and all that stuff. So I suggest people, if they're interested, look more into that. And but just to let people know, these are the states that have just got into it recently. So just want to cover a little bit of that. So the Kansas state legislature, I thought it was funny that they're emulating Doge by having a website and having people suggest how to like cut funding at the state level in Kansas. And, so they're doing that. And then as part of this, they're also doing a ban on these, guaranteed income programs. And then also, so here's the Montana one. And here's like the wording of it. It's very typical. I don't know if I could just read that or cover just with click what that says.
They're
But,
calling it the
yeah.
Work Protection Act.
Right, the Work Protection Act. Yeah.
It's fucked up. Like what? That is some twisted word.
Yeah,
play
and-
there.
Because
And
work
again,
is
like-
in danger.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the 1984-esque, part of this, calling it the Work Protection Act. We know from all these other pilots that it's actually very frequent that we see work increases. Like if we see an employment decrease, it's very small, and it's actually very possible to see work increase. We've seen that multiple times.
Especially
And
quality
again-
of work. Quality of work increases. It's not just
Yeah,
amount,
quality,
but
quantity, jobs, entrepreneurship. There's all kinds of reasons if you're pro work to like the results of all these programs. And again, too, as we discussed with the problems with welfare, like, the existing system, I wouldn't say it protects work to have a program that involves a welfare cliff or like a steep marginal tax rate of like 50% or even greater than that, where
Yeah.
if people
But-
take a job, then they end up worse
Yeah.
off. Like that's not protecting work. So it's,
But that's not what they would suggest. They would suggest, fuck everybody and nobody gets anything, and you got to earn your right to live. So it's hard to get into that argument with like a super hardline right winger, because they're not looking for a way to encourage and support people. They're just looking punitively at things, fairly simply.
Yeah. Oh, it said so. The third one, Florida, and I actually thought they already had that banned in Florida because FGA actually started in Florida, but I guess they didn't succeed in banning it yet. So, yeah, now they are.
I'm glad they turned. Now I'm starting to be glad they changed the name to guaranteed income, though. So when we come back as a universal basic income, we can differentiate ourselves and say this is the way forward, and sort of do a dodge around these bans and this legislative pushback.
Yeah. And I'll just read this. It said, so it came as a little surprise last week when a pair of new bills suddenly surfaced in Tallahassee meant to banish guaranteed income from Florida. The legislation filed just a few days before Florida lawmakers opened their 2025 session would specifically prohibit a city or county from making any kind of payments to people through a guaranteed income program. There should be noted no government-run guaranteed income programs in Florida currently, but the goal is to stop any before they might start. So, we know one of the programs actually that we really like and we've talked about before was the Gainesville, Florida program that was that focused on those who were recently incarcerated, and it showed that there was a decrease in recidivism, and a lot of other good outcomes too, including increased employment, from that program. But it's not operating currently, and then if this would pass, you could only do a program like that if it was fully privately funded. And yeah, I just want to again make sure that people understand that this is billionaire funded stuff. Like this is, I would say, conservative billionaire funded stuff. And so like if you're a progressive, if you're anyone who feels that billionaires have too much power, and you're saying something like they really want universal basic income, like it's a trick, it's a Trojan horse, this is something that they want to trick you into, because they're going to have more control over you. Like, it's nonsense. These people are really trying hard to make sure that these programs don't happen. And they're hoping that by doing these bans state by state, that they can do a ban at the federal level, even, I'm sure, in order to really stop this from happening. So don't fall for it. Don't carry water for the billionaires by saying that base income is like, pro rich people in order to like better control people. Like, no, that's nonsense.
I feel like
it's a bad argument to begin with, like, because if the alternative is to be controlled to the extent that we already are and be poor, or to be controlled in the same way and have some extra money to live, like, take the extra money idea. Like, there's nothing. I mean, even if that is the case, that it is being given out as a way of like manipulating you, like, at least you're not broke, right? Like,
it's power in your pocket.
Take the bribe
with no strings, and it's not something that says you can't work. Yeah, it's so wildly illogical. It's like when people talk about like, what if the landlords all just gobble up the money? And it's like, that's like if there's a highway, if there's like a burglar going around robbing people, and their solution is, let's just not have anything. Then he won't have anything to rob. It's like, that's not the solution. You have to stop the robbing. So like when it comes to landlords, it's like, we do need, regulation to make sure all the land and housing isn't speculated away. And we need some sort of, whether it's rent control or just accessibility.
Land value taxation.
Land value taxation. So it's not, so this finite resource that everyone absolutely needs isn't monopolized. And then it can be a free market. God, I had something else, but I forget it.
Okay, the next thing.
Oh, I remembered it. While you're looking for it, the billionaires thing, and you mentioned progressives. I feel like I'm seeing fewer on the progressive side, fronting this sort of level of wild illogic, like this is a billionaire trick, and all the tech billionaires are just trying to get you to give them control. Like, I'm not seeing that very often from progressives anymore. I'm still seeing it from the right wing. I feel like the progressive side is opening up more, just in general, like more embracing this idea, which is good in some ways, and in other ways it's like the more one group opens up and embraces it, I feel like the other group will be like, oh, this is something we need to guard against. And so maybe that's part of these legislative attacks, is like, the Bernie bros are now into UBI. We need to be against it,
So that's a good intro to the next thing I wanted to talk about, because we got to cover the Doge
welcome.
dividend checks. So it's funny to see this suggestion. So if people missed it, there was it got a lot of coverage recently where someone proposed. This is an advisor to Doge actually proposed. So this is not like some random person, but an advisor to Doge suggested that 20% of all the cuts made to the federal government should go to as a dividend to Americans. And is when you look at the fine print, like I guess first of all, let's just say that it was really popular because people see Doge dividend, and the number was $5,000. The number is $5,000 because this was built on 20% of a $2 trillion cut assumption. Based on the fact that Elon said that they could totally cut $2 trillion, and so assuming they cut that amount, then 20% of that would be a $5,000 check to Americans. And so because it's dividend, people are assuming that everyone gets it.
I think that's going to happen when the Teslas start fully self-driving. I think it's on that same sort of timeline.
Yeah. We'll get into like all the kind of absurdity of this. And like, one piece at a time, like each element, what makes it.
I didn't read this article,
ridiculous.
but I wish I had. So can you like give us a little summary of what your take is here?
Yeah. So this was my summary. of it. And so I think I get into, people can go to scottsounds.com, and it's the most recent article I have. So you can get into the details of it here. But I think like one of the most important elements, besides the fact that $5,000 is unrealistic, there's no way that they're going to cut $2 trillion. And it's most likely going to be much smaller than that. In which case, maybe you'll get $200 instead of like $5,000. So a couple of details there are that, first of all, this is not universal. So already, if you're thinking this is kind of like a stimulus check that went to like 90% of people, that's wrong. What this would do is it would go to only the top 60%. The bottom 40% would get nothing. The reasoning there is that you have to be a net payer of taxes, so after the standard deduction. So if you're earning $15,000 and the standard deduction is $15,000, then you owe $0, based on that. You have $0 of taxable income, so you don't pay. So you have to earn more than the amount of the standard deduction. And as long as you owe even like $1, and you pay $1 in federal taxes, then according to the plan, you would get the full amount. So it's not even like a phase in or phase out kind of thing. It's just like everyone, as long as you're a net contributor, would get this, which means the top 60%.
It's like the opposite of a cliff, maybe. It's what is it? It's like a tax credit trampoline, like boing.
Right. So their logic is, there's all these people that are, so lazy, and if they knew that they could, just earn, an extra $1,000 to get $5,000, so then they would totally do that. So the payment wouldn't be till like next year after you do taxes and you prove that you've earned enough to get it. Then you would get that full amount. But again, the full amount would not be $5,000. And also another detail of this is that it's per household. So if you're thinking that this is kind of like a basic income where it's per person, again, you're wrong. It's not only not universal, but it's per household. So, if you have a household of, 2 adults and 3 kids or something, then you would get, say, $1,000 if the amount is $1,000, and if you're a single adult, you get $1,000. So it actually punishes families. It punishes people for being married, filing jointly, because they don't get like twice as much. It's just per household, which I think is also kind of funny, coming from like the pro-family kind of
first.
party.
Yeah.
Right. Like let's
Like the
help
population
kids.
decline alarmists.
Right. I'm surprised this was even that well thought out. I kind of just, when I was reading headlines about it, I thought it was just kind of like another one of those, like, let's throw out this idea and see if it sticks at all. But so the
It's
fact
funny.
that they even thought it through this much is kind of surprising to me.
It's funny. The more they thought it through and added things,
The
the
worse
worse
it
of
got,
an
yeah.
idea. It's like let's
Right.
let's make sure it's not this good or that
So
good.
here's
or
a
this
good idea. Let's ruin it.
Yeah, and it's hard to know, to even estimate how many Trump supporters, how many like Trump voters would not get this, and thinking that they would. And so because we don't know exactly, party affiliation compared to income, and it's just kind of like estimates. But I estimated that if you assume that I found some data that about 1/3 based on exit polls that are below the income line would not get it. So which works out to 17 million Trump voters or Trump voting households that would not get this. So that's like a significant number of people who I would think would be upset, or at least they'd be excited about this or are excited about this without knowing that they're actually excluded because they're not rich enough.
Yeah.
Like they're just not earning enough money to qualify.
I don't think they'd be uniquely upset though, because that's pretty in line with the kind of shit the Democrats have done and the government has done in general since the Clinton era. like EITC that doesn't phase in until you make enough money. Like that's sort of, I'm not used to the whole trampoline effect thing where I think the EITC phased in rather than just starting at an arbitrary point. But like these
Yeah.
people are used to being left out by most, unless you're going to get the welfare and face that stigma you've seen before. But anything that's like, this is your dividend or this is your refundable tax credit, like basically it's standard US policy from both sides to just completely disregard these people.
Yeah, I guess it's the title of it. You know, they're selling it as a dividend, which also is interesting because we know that dividend sells well. The Alaska has their Alaskan dividend. It's a UBI, and Andrew Yang ran on the Freedom dividend. The reasoning for that was even polling based on dividend polling well and Freedom polling well.
Right.
Like dividend works well, and you hear it. I think when I hear it, I think universal. So if I'm a Trump voter and I'm excited about this, I'm low income, and I'm like, yeah, cut all that stuff. That's not helping me. Whatever, cut those programs, even though that they could be helping them or helping in the future. Get rid of those, and I expect to get my cut, and they're not going to know that they're not going to get their cut.
But I mean, they're looking at this like shareholders who own like very large amounts of shares in companies, so they get the bigger dividends, right? So if you don't have shares in a company, you don't get a dividend. And so they're basically taking the population, instead of saying one citizen, one share, they're saying, you get a share if you put in enough money, essentially. I'm surprised they didn't say like, you get a lot more the more you pay in taxes of this Doge dividend, where it's like, I am a little surprised by the trampoline effect. In fact, like I would think that it would get bigger the higher up the income spectrum you go, if they were going to be consistent. But yeah, it's not. It's basically taking a big chunk of the country and saying you are not a shareholder in this country. You don't count, essentially. It's
interesting too to think of like the edge cases, and that would definitely be upset. And there's reasoning too behind. We talked about this during COVID. Where they're with stimulus checks, it used like old data, and so the same kind of issue is like here, where let's say you've been a payer of taxes, for let's say 20 years or something, and then most recently or this year, because it would be judging by, let's say you lost your job, and then so you're actually one of those people who doesn't have the income this year, in which case you wouldn't get this Doge dividend, check that you think that you should, because, you were a payer for 20 years, and now you weren't. And it judges based on only that previous year. So I could see people getting pretty upset too, saying like, I deserve this. I had a low income this year, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't contributing taxes, for decades. But, the way they measure that doesn't matter, which is, again, why universal basic income is good, because it doesn't care what your income is ever.
Yeah.
It's never judging you for that.
It's kind of like taking someone on Social Security and saying, well, what are you doing for us lately? And like they spent their whole career socking money away and contributing to the economy. But it's like, well, you don't count anymore because you're not doing it anymore. It's sort of absurd. It's just a basic break of the social contract.
So the next thing I wanted to cover, this is what I thought was like particularly funny and juicy, I think, about this Doge dividend stuff, is that the like head economic advisor was asked about what would happen to inflation about these checks. And so I don't know, I just feel this is gold, and we can discuss why, but so enjoy the answer about, would these dividend checks cause inflation?
Oh, absolutely not, because imagine if we don't spend government money and we give it back to people, then if they spend it all, then you're even. But they're probably going to save a lot of it, in which case you're reducing inflation.
Okay, so you're
And
not-
also, when the government spends a lot, that's what creates inflation. We learned that from Joe Biden. And so if we reduce government spending, then that's reduces inflation. And if you give people money, then they're going to save a bunch of it. And when they save it, then that also reduces demand and reduces inflation.
Okay, so you're not worried about it. And
No, I'm
Mr.
not.
Wold?
I mean, we should just make him the spokesperson for that. And like, we should just share Trump's economist. Anytime someone asks about inflation, just share that video. Just be like, no, this is why.
Yeah, and I he's not wrong even about this, which is what I really enjoy. Is that they'll lie about inflation for other things. They'll lie, and even he said there, like, oh, Biden caused inflation because that, but like this isn't going to do that. This is different. And so yeah, to cut just for people to know too about reasons why. It's true to say that, okay, if the government was going to spend, $2 trillion, and instead of spending that $2 trillion through, federal workers' paychecks, instead it went to 60% of the population as direct checks for them to spend, then there's not more money being spent into the economy. It's different people spending like different amounts of money, but it's the same total money. And that doesn't have inflationary pressure, except for, the fact that maybe if there's, a bunch of people spending money in a way that exceeds supply for those certain things, then it would. But for the most part, it's just not,
So
as long
I
as it's
mean,
not expanding the money supply, then it
I would
wouldn't.
have
So-
I would have loved for someone in the room to follow that up with like, so a tax-funded basic income would not cause inflation. Is that where
That's exactly, yeah. That's what that logic says, is that as long as it's not deficit financed, if it's a deficit neutral universal basic income, according to Trump's chief economist, if he were being honest, he would say it would have no inflationary pressure.
But also, if people were to start saving money, then that's
Right, and that's another element of it too, is that one of the reasons basic income isn't as inflationary as people think it is because one, not everyone is going to spend the money. If the only inflationary pressure from actually spending it. So if you save it, no inflationary pressure. And also if you pay off debts like your credit card bills, which is, we know from experiments, a lot of people do too. If you pay off your debts, then that's actually deflationary, because what that does is actually shrink the money supply, because the debt is actually an increase in the money supply through private banking. And so, yeah, it's if you pay it off, it's actually deflationary. So some people, depending on how, let's say 1/3 save it, 1/3 pay off credit card debt, and 1/3 spend it. So then, 1/3 it would not be inflationary, 1/3 it would be deflationary, and 1/3 would be potentially inflationary.
So would a rule that, like an anti-usury rule, basically, that like credit cards and mortgages and like they had to bring down their rates of interest down below whatever, like if it's up at 20% for a credit card and they had to bring it down to like 8%, or would that have an anti or inflationary effect, like mathematically, just in general?
If you brought down interest rates on debt, then you would expect more people to take on debt, which would be monetary expansionary. Like you would expand the money supply via debt. So higher interest rates discourage that expansion, and lower interest rates encourage it.
But also higher interest rates have that, you can't keep up with paying down your debt, so it just grows effect as well. So
yeah, so if you're looking at,
But
say,
the
treasury
money's already in the
securities,
supply at that point. What's that? Keep going.
let's kind of separate this from, there's like private banking, private loans and stuff, and then there's public treasury securities. And I think those are kind of two different things, where there is like potentially inflationary pressure through treasury securities, because the way that works is that essentially when someone buys a treasury security, they're trading, $100 in cash for a $100 bond that pays interest, and the U.S. Would actually basically print the money. Like every time they pay interest, it's just newly created money, just like all federal spending is newly created money. So you're increasing the money supply with the interest paid on treasury securities. And then if all that people do is take that interest and then buy more treasury securities, then of course that's not inflationary because they're not actually buying anything. They're just like accumulating more and more wealth through this increase in money. But if they do take that interest and let's say buy goods and services, then that would be inflationary. So then that's different than with the private market because like the interest paid isn't expanding. It's not like the banks aren't creating like the interest. They're getting that, and you've got the savings, and then that's going out to people getting the interest. So it's slightly different. But the big thing is that if you pay off your credit card, then that's like eliminating money from the money supply, and therefore that's deflationary. So it's just interesting to me that he brought that stuff up.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird that it's like this whole different way of understanding when you hear it from people from kind of this side of things. Like the idea that the money's now going to only the people that have that basically when they get it aren't really going to be spending it. It's the people that are already well off, right? So any money that they get, they're going to save probably. And so his argument is that by rich people saving more money, you're going to bring inflation down. Is that, I mean, did I get that? Is that the gist of it? Like if we take this money
Basically
out of public hands, put it back in the pockets of rich people, and let them just hoard it some more, now we've reduced prices for people rather than just giving people enough money to buy the things they need, right?
This is actually a good segue into like another thing I want to make sure people know, and that happened recently. And so here is like a chart that I think everyone should know about. And this is that, most recently it reached the point, like inequality has reached the point where the top 10% is doing half of the consumer spending in our economy. And you can see, over time that, back in like 1990, the top 10% was at 40% of the consuming. And, now it's at 50, and you've got like the bottom 90%. And you see that, that's gone down over time to, the 60 to 90% is, so the middle class is like down to 30%. And then the bottom 60%, let's say was around 24 or so, is now down to, like.
So it's the bottom all the way to the upper middle class are all gradually losing their spending power in the economy, and the top 10% have been going up.
Yeah, and those have severe implications. Like that is market distorting. I think that it's important that people understand that when it comes to inflation, high inequality can actually lead to inflation too. The reason that works is that if you've got 10%, the top 10%, which so that's works out to about like households over $250,000 per year in income. If they're doing most of the consuming in an economy that is built on, 70% is from consumer spending, so it's built on people buying goods and services, then these are the people who are less price sensitive. So like let's look at eggs as an example. If you're earning over $250,000 per year and you like eggs, you're going to pay more for eggs. It doesn't matter.
Right.
And eggs are already kind of price insensitive. Like people are like, no matter what income bracket you are in, you really like eggs, so it's more, it's going to hurt to pay $8 instead of, $3. But you're still going to do it. But like when you're high income, if you're the top 10%, you're really one of those people who like, I don't care. I'm just going to buy the eggs. It sucks, but okay, great. It's fine. It doesn't really hurt me.
It's like not worth me expending mental energy to make a decision here. It's like I still am fine no matter what.
Yeah, you're not gonna buy a chicken and set up a coop in your backyard or something because like you can't stand paying that much for eggs. You're not gonna look for substitutes, even though like eggs are kind of interesting in that they don't really have some good substitutes. If you like eggs, those are the choice that you have. But there's this distortion coming from people with lots of money just buying what they want, and it's kind of like a system where you're bidding up prices.
Yeah.
That's also why like housing is more expensive because people
like
buying the houses, they don't care.
If you're the
They'll buy it.
grocery store and most of your eggs are being bought by rich people who wouldn't know the difference between $8 and $15 really, then you're going to charge $15 even if it prices out all the middle and lower income people, because that's too
Right.
ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah, that hits really hard in cities too, where it's like you're in the same like geographic market. Like so, like I drive through Beverly Hills sometimes to get home, and there are gas stations that will deliberately just add $2 to a gallon of gas. Like in the like most lucrative the in the richest parts of Beverly Hills, if you're driving through there, you'll just look at the price and it says it's $6.99 a gallon or something like that, and they do fine. Like the gas stations themselves just tack on extra money, and like, but if I'm stuck in that, if I need gas and like this is the closest gas station, I'm kind of screwed. And so, and like even more so the people that are working at the gas station, right? Like,
yeah, that was shocking to me actually. I'm used to and basically in like a uniform gas price within a general area, where like I'm in upstate New York and it's like there's maybe a 10-cent difference across town. But yeah, when I was just out in LA, it's like one is $4 and one is $6.50. I'm like, how can they? And they're like a mile apart, and no one wants to drive anywhere out of their neighborhood through LA traffic. There's like, I don't give a shit. It's like $20 difference. I don't care. Yeah.
So to tie this back to what we were talking about too, like, so the logic that says Doge dividend checks, or let's say just basic income too, let's say it's not going to be inflationary as people think it is because those with high incomes will save it. But then also on the flip side of that is that if you have a high income, then let's say you'll save your check or whatever. But also you're spending more money on all the stuff that you're spending money on. Like you care less about price hikes because you're less sensitive. So it's actually lower inequality is better for prices overall because you have more people like voting on what the prices should be.
Right.
As soon as you restrict that, it's more of like an auction system. And then you've got like the rich, going, oh, well, I'll pay this for that. And oh, I'll pay this. And it just raises up the prices for everybody.
As soon as you have a group of people, especially if it's expanding and large or largely powerful, that are completely price insensitive, then it just screws up the whole idea of the market. Wolf Gold in the chat is saying, also on the other side of the coin, you have things like food deserts where there's no shops within a certain number of miles because it's less lucrative. Same with pharmacies and things like that, where, yeah, I think about that a lot, where I've been talking with people from food security work, and there's definitely a shift in that space where I think people are getting fed up with how hard it is for food banks to get food to people in general, and wanting to try cash. And if you've got cash to everyone in a food desert sort of neighborhood, like I've lived in a bunch of them where you got to take a train ride to go buy produce, it's just chips and sodas within a mile of you. if you had that whole community had a certain amount of cash, that's just creating a market where now all of a sudden it makes sense for a supermarket to come in and start selling produce because people can buy it.
Yeah, that's one of the problems too about SNAP. And if so many different places that sell food, it doesn't necessarily mean you accept SNAP. And so, like, if you have SNAP, maybe there's lots of options around you, or at least some options around you, where if it was cash, you could already buy stuff. But let's say if you can only spend SNAP on food because that's all you have, then your options are extremely limited. So it's like that can even help lead to food deserts. Let's say there's SNAP food deserts versus like cash food deserts.
That's another thing that adds to that stigma we were talking about before. There's something I wanted to mention that I didn't mention before when we were talking about the stigma of something like food stamps, is that like we had someone in our basic income program was talking about how she had grown up in poverty, and just the visceral visual difference of like, oh, I'm a kid who's at the store and we have these stupid blue pieces of paper and everyone knows I'm a welfare kid, and you don't want that, and now I'm ashamed of my mom or whatever. It's like it's just fucked up to do that. People should be able to have the same cash, not like worthless person cash versus real person cash. This is kind of what it implies to people.
Yeah, and I think like kind of tied to this too is we're seeing this in stores like Walgreens and CVS's or whatever, where if you're in like a neighborhood where it's like a lower income neighborhood, it's like you're more likely to see theft in that store, and then so you're more likely to see like all the stuff like locked up behind these locked up cases. And anyone who's experienced that, you're like less likely to go to that store because you don't want to deal with that. And then so then that store does worse. And it's just like, that store can even close. And so, if we want even to like do the opposite of these deserts, like we want local stores to function and thrive, then you need to make sure that everyone actually has enough money to actually go to these stores. And that's how basic income would help too, and actually would reduce the amount of stuff like behind lock and key,
right.
Because there'd be less theft.
Right. Yeah. I go to these stores and it's like, well, I want to buy deodorant and whatever, and like I'm paying customers. You're like, I don't want to wait for the employee to come over with his little key and let me in.
Yeah.
It's like, so they're losing all kinds of business because we operate in a society based on distrust, and that distrust of like not trusting people with cash leads to theft, which leads to more distrust, which leads to inconvenience, which is like, it's just not a sustainable model, and these businesses break down. I mean, this is exactly what you said. I'm just processing in my own words.
Just to like get back to the sort of macroeconomic picture, that chart was very interesting. I'd seen that one around, like, and we're sort of now talking about like these. We have tons and tons of anecdotal evidence about why these forces are at work here. The income disparity is actually kind of in this cycle now. Like the more of it you have, the more inflation you have, the more spending you see on the part of the upper class. Like that, I'm calling it upper class, but I think that is accurate, right? We're talking about like the expansion of a class system here, right? And so is the inflation itself like creating more of the wealth gap? I guess you're saying, yeah, probably it looks that way, and
like they're self-perpetuating.
Yeah, but like, where can you say one is like causing the other, or they're just because they're so interrelated that they're creating this like more
feedback loop?
Yeah, the feedback loop, and would reducing what is the best way of like keeping that feedback loop, of interrupting that feedback loop?
Or making it a good feedback loop in the other direction.
Right,
like,
right.
can you snowball? Like one of the things I want to measure with commingle over time that none of the pilots have been able to do because they can't be macro and they're not permanent. is like a rising tide effect. You know, does the
Mhm.
general community start to succeed and prosper more and more compared to a control because of like this virtuous cycle of more money, more
I mean,
trust,
yeah,
more
that's
power, helping
our
more
whole
people.
hypothesis, and so
Yeah.
we're like basing everything on that, and so, but like kind of understanding the other side can probably shed like the understanding how things are moving in the opposite direction can shed light on how, you know, uh, trying to intervene can actually help, right?
Can we call it a hypothesis?
A hypothesis, yeah. And then then there's the question of like that Wolf Gold says here is like how much of this is by design, right? And I think like pointing to the $5,000 dividend going back to the rich people, that does seem to be either by design or like just a misguided attempt at correcting things. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that like I don't like leaning into like this by design stuff. It just feels conspiratorial, and there's just a lot of ways that people, make decisions and they don't know the results of those. There's not a wide understanding of these things. And I would say to your question about, what's driving what, I think it's mostly inequality driving inflation to some degree. Like there's a specific type of inflation that comes from high inequality. And so, there's other things that are leading to inequality, and inflation can partly feed into that. But there's other reasons why, like lower taxes on the rich, and the impacts of wage stagnation from automation, offshoring over decades, that has driven inequality up. And the next thing I want to talk about is directly related to that. But before I get to that, I just also want to illustrate a little bit of like how like higher taxes on the rich would actually be good for them, even based on prices. So imagine like an auction setup where it's like a high inequality situation, and you've got someone with like $100 billion versus someone with like $1 billion that are bidding on like some painting. And the guy with $1 billion, let's say they're willing to spend $50 million on this painting. And then, of course,
Super
the one with $100
relatable.
billion is
I'm really connecting to
No,
this.
it's good.
I-
No,
I
you're
can
talking
understand
in
it.
the right language for the people. That
like just
This is our
yeah,
crowd?
like really
Is that
think of like
Let's really
Okay.
put our minds in these heads here.
just
Okay, so I have
Yeah.
$50 million. Okay.
I'm telling you, you can apply this other stuff. Just bear with me. Okay. So you can imagine in that scenario that, the $100 billion person is going to be able to spend a shit ton more. And let's say they'll end up buying the painting for, like $100 million or something. And then you have like, let's imagine a lower inequality setup where we're actually taxing the ultra wealthy to like a larger degree. And now let's say, there isn't anyone with $100 billion because like we're really taxing them down. And so now you've got someone with like, 50 billion, and then, you've got someone, with like $1 billion or whatever. That painting can potentially sell for less. And the same person gets it, but they pay less money for it. And that's the way this works for like in a high inequality system. It's really kind of a bidding kind of system on like everything they buy. Like a house goes for a lot more money when you've got like two bidders who are both rich going for it. And if you tax them more, you won't change who gets it. So why would you, as a rich person, get pissed off about being taxed more if you still get everything you want, but it's actually at a lower price because there's less to bid up these prices? And if you're, the middle class or lower, you'll see lower house prices. So like you're more able to buy those houses. Whereas right now it's only this pure bidding setup where like the rich are the ones consuming these things and they're driving up the prices. So
Yeah.
that's another way that wealth tax, or like, taxing the rich more, can actually lower prices for everybody because of this kind of like bidding setup.
and it's the reason UBI should be tax funded. It should be a redistribution, and people are afraid of that word, but it should be, and everyone should be happy about it. It's funny, like I'm with you, Scott, on the I shy away from the by design thing, because I think we've sort of, most of our stuff is like unintended consequences of a system, like writ large, like people not building something for a system that was going to grow in the way it did. But the funny thing to me is that in order to try to do our stuff with commingle and to fix the thing, we are actually conspiring to fix it by design, like at a systemic level. And we're sort of trying to do the opposite of what happened, more just over time and a bunch of bad decisions and maybe a little bit of design that led to larger effects. And it was been really interesting for me. I just started doing the sort of impact, some charting for impact estimates for commingle, and charting like the Gini curve, essentially the inequality curve before and after a week of commingling the money. And it really makes it clear, like the curve is basically like a it's one of these exponential lines, and the closer it gets to like a flat diagonal line, the less inequality. And the direct, simple mechanism of commingle is an inequality reducing maneuver. That's all it is. You just, before and after the thing, inequality starts at one place and then it reduces. That's basically what commingle is doing. A bunch of people saying we want to actively decide to reduce our inequality and also create a floor for the bottom. And we can measure that directly. I'm just playing around watching the curves and like, what if we get, people put in this much money or whatever. And that's one of the things I would love to be able to pair that with like a large population doing this and see, like, I hadn't thought about like the way prices can even drop in a community, but like, what if we have like a saturation area or a town and we can actually measure some of that sort of stuff on Main Street? I think it opens up a lot of potential to like really understand the economics of this stuff at scale.
Yeah. So here's the opposite of what you're just talking about with commingle and just what we've been talking about with inequality and stuff. So first of all, like we've shared this before, and I share this actually quite often.
Me too.
Which is this was done in 2019. The study was done in 2019 to analyze just like how much money has flowed upwards as inequality increased from 1973. And they concluded that the top 1% had taken $50 trillion that would have gone to the bottom 90%. And part of that too is in 2018 alone, $2.5 trillion would have flowed to the bottom 90%, and that could have been $11.44 a month in essentially universal basic income. And so, like, I like to point that out because people, how can we afford a basic income? And it's like, well, if we had the same amount of inequality as we did in 1973, if productivity had not decoupled from wages, and we had like implemented the basic income then, and it grew as GDP grew over time, then it would be $11.44 a month. So, people should already see that, hey, you are owed a basic income. It's yours from productivity growth, but you're not getting it. It's only going to like the top 1%.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned this because that study was just recently updated, and Bernie Sanders has been talking about this in like, as he goes around, from town to town recently, doing his like rallies and stuff. It's one of the things that he's mentioned is this new study already updated, and it's gone up to 79 trillion.
It's like 4 years later,
wealth.
It's like,
that's how
more,
massively inequality has increased in that time. So in 2023, this is 5 years later, it would be $3.9 trillion per year that should have gone to the bottom 90%.
wow.
And that would work out to a basic income of $1,500 per month. So that's already what we could be doing.
And this is when people so the common response is I earned all my money. I don't want to pay it in taxes to people who didn't or whatever. I have a response that can diverge in two different ways. I say, like, are you in the top 1% or the bottom 99%, or the top? Are you very wealthy or not? And if they're very wealthy, it's like, actually, no, you received more income based on the way society stacked things in your favor, or you're the boss and you skimmed more from your employees or whatever. But if you're almost anyone else, I say you didn't earn every penny you ever got. You earned a lot more, and it was either blocked from getting to you or skimmed off by your bosses or taken from you out of like the economics of the situation we have, where it's like reframing it as like you actually earned a lot more than you got. I think is important for people to come to.
Yeah, pre-1973, productivity rose with wages. They were like directly in line. And so as people got more productive, they got paid more. That broke in 1973. And I would argue it's never coming back. Like it was the result of it was automation and globalization. And as a result of that, that pushed down on wages. And so it's just impossible to like correct that, to make it so like, oh, jobs always pay in line with productivity growth. Basic income, I would argue, is the only way of making sure that people actually do get their share of productivity growth. And yeah, this is how large it is, and it's how quickly it's growing. And I want people to get mad over this. You know, like this fact ties directly to the chart we saw earlier, as far as, you know, the top 10% consuming more of the entire economy. The reason is because inequality has been growing, and this is like another way of looking at that massive inequality.
Well, it also ties directly to how absolutely foolish it is for the Democratic Party's answer to like shit's tough, eggs are expensive or whatever, for their answer to be, what are you talking about? The economy is amazing. The look at the stock market is up, when it's 10% of people own like 90% of stocks or whatever it is. Like most people aren't touched by these like successes that people are touting about the economy. People on the Democratic, it's like it's just a big like ignore, head in the sand thing, where if it's not lost on me that the South, religious people, increasingly people of color, have been written off by the Democratic Party as like, oh, they left us. It's like, what are you talking about? You left them. They were mainstays. Yeah. Like how can the working class be lost by a party that is the one who's supposed to be like standing up for their interests? As it's because they're not, you know, and they're not coming to terms with the fact that they're not.
Yeah, there was a great video I watched recently from Ezra Klein that I recommend people watch, and we don't have time to watch it here, but he made like the point really well, I thought, as far as like looking at Democratic controlled, you know, cities and states and stuff, and showing like you cannot say that you're the party of the working class and you are not the party of the working class if the working class like can't afford to live in your cities and states. You know, this shows that, you know, the population is declining in California, New York, you know, Illinois, and it's increasing in, you know, Texas and Florida. And, you know, a lot of this is because of cost of living, where if you've just made it too expensive. And so if Democrats are actually going to make the case that they're the party of the working class, they have to make these changes in those cities and states that make sure that people can actually afford to live there. And, you know, they're not doing that, then for all these reasons, you know, maybe they require, you know, all these weird, like environmental regulations and stuff that mean like you don't build up more housing. Maybe it takes like 5 years to build up X amount of housing, whereas realistically you should be able to do that, you know, in like 6 months or something. And so they have to like reduce they have to increase their state capacity to actually build and do these things if they're gonna, make that case.
Yeah, and it seems like it's coming to a head for them. Like, generally the right wing side is like people should be on their own and self-reliant. So there's not a whole lot to argue there, except that no, we should give people the floor to start from. But from the Democratic side, their basic mainstay argument that like at least we're doing something is basically in a moment of reckoning where it's like that's something that you're doing, lifting whatever 20% of people in poverty, a little higher out of poverty, is becoming less and less true in sort of a catastrophic way. So they can't even lean on their laurels in terms of like, well, we're the ones who help some people, because their systems and mechanisms just aren't working.
Yeah, Wolf Gold said both major parties are absolutely infiltrated by Wall Street, and I just wanted to uplift that. It's not only the U.S. Like it's crazy watching this happen in the UK too. Just in the last week, the Labour Party there has been like pushing austerity. Like it's saying, look, we got to tighten the belt, and so let's actually reduce the amount of spending we're doing for disability. And they're not talking about higher taxes. Like it would be so much easier, even if they were to just enforce the taxes that are owed by the rich, then you would actually, I can't remember the number, but let's say it's pretty big. It's like, it would be 10 times what they want to do by cutting disability payments. But they're not talking about that. It's off the table. So they're just doing austerity. And yeah, you see that here too, where like if you gotta, like, someone at some point has to start running hard besides Bernie Sanders on higher taxes on the rich. And it's very popular, like grassroots wise, it polls really well.
Is he touring, right? I'm getting his emails and it gives me a little
he's touring.
reassurance. He's touring and he's like, we were in a town of 10,000 people and we got 3,000 people at our rally. It's like, that's the issue, is people are ready for populism because it's about the working class. It's about people. And if you give people a choice between false populism, demagoguery, whatever, and status quo, what are you talking about? Things are great. Even if people know deep down the demagogue is saying, let's burn it all down and whatever, it's like, it's at least we're not, careening slowly off a cliff. At least something's got to get shaken up. I understand why people make that choice, and I'm incredibly sad that we've been put in that position where people feel like they don't really have a choice for a real populist. The whole Bernie would have won thing, to me, people like dispute. It's like, it's beyond question for me. Like, I don't know. Yeah,
and now we're in a situation where you've got Elon Musk, the richest person in the world, getting like an infomercial for his car company yesterday from the president on the White House lawn. It's like we're living in this really like Black Mirror Twilight Zone kind of thing where the billionaires are absolutely like in control, and they're not even trying to hide it. And that is like people don't want that. Like it is really unpopular to have this oligarchy of billionaires making decisions for everybody.
And Bernie
what's
is like,
scary is like how much people are starting to think like they're getting on board with it. They're like, yeah, okay, yeah, this is what we need to. Like there was somebody responding on Twitter about like, here's what we should do, because like people are starting to do graffiti on Teslas and Cybertrucks. That they said the best way would be the way they do it in Singapore, where they cane people that are graffiti artists. And like, but the responses were like, yeah, good idea. This is what we should be doing. They deserve a spanking. Like, and so that was the part that was really scary. To me. Like, the people have bought into this answer. All of the stuff that comes with this answer, this sort of, that started as kind of a populist movement or idea, is now just quickly transformed into the worst of humanity.
And Strat in the chat said what I was about to say. Like, Bernie's 83 years old already, so Scott's right about more leaders needed. AOC is a possibility. To me, it's basically we need more leaders who aren't careerists. We need people to
Yeah.
step in and say, I don't give a fuck if I get this job. Like I don't need it. I want to do it. I want to serve. And here's what I stand for. Not people who are like, even convincing themselves, well, the longer I stay in power, maybe the more chances I'll have to do something good. It's like, no, if you're not doing something now or standing up for something now, then get out of the way. And we need more people to stand up and run on those policies and
it needs to
on
be
those policies. And yeah,
it needs to be authentic too. There's definitely a difference. Like Bernie is 100% authentic in regards to his views on, the rich and oligarchy and billionaires and
Right.
stuff. Like there's no doubt in my mind that if he became president, then he would really push for wealth taxes and reducing inequality and whatnot. But if you have someone other than Bernie, like just some brand new politician, and they run on that, like they could be running on that because it's popular and they don't really mean it or whatever. Or it could be that they do, but we don't know. But when it comes to Bernie, we know. And I think that's what really helps him go to these rural areas. And people are like, no, he's talking about the rich. I mean, that's his like,
yeah.
he's
And
really
he
speaking to the issue.
And he can be like, well, what are you gonna do? Fire me? I'm living on borrowed time, so I'll do what I can. It's like that's the first time I ever tried a Bernie impression. But we need other people to sort of have that same sort of mentality. It's like civil service is civil service. It's not a lifelong career. It's you do as much as you can, and the people reward it by reelecting you if they like what you're doing. Maybe that's naive. Maybe the realities. I mean, absolutely. In today, the realities preclude that because of like the way the DNC operates. But that's the world I want to live in.
So I wanted to get to some Canada news next, and this is kind of on the more positive side, kind of the more exciting side. And this is like their PBO, Parliamentary Budget Office, released a distributional analysis of a national guaranteed basic income just very recently. And what was so interesting about this analysis is that the net cost is something that they calculated, and it's very low. So just to get into a bit of what that concluded is you could reduce poverty overall by like almost in half, and the net cost of that would be about $3.6 billion. And of course, like the cost of poverty is like 10 times that. And so you can look at that as being, well, Canada would actually be $32 billion better off by doing this. Like they would actually save that much money because of like how affordable like it would be to do this. So like the design that they're talking about is it's always a phase out. Canada is never going to do like a fully universal amount.
Until we show them the way.
Right. They do a phase out for their child benefit. They do a phase out for their senior benefit. They're going to do a phase out for working adults benefit. But so the amount that they're looking at was like $23,000. I think is what it was for like the floor. So it's like a negative income tax kind of variant, the 50% phase out rate. And then in Canada too, they kind of, it's not like per person, it's kind of a household it's less than like two people would. And then their measure of poverty is, different than ours. It's and they have like different ways of defining this too, depending on like, nuclear family versus economic family, which is kind of confusing too. But like, long story short, this is like a serious proposal for, here it is, 21,903 for a single person, 30,975 for a couple, phase out rate of 50 cents, additional amount of 7,355 per year for those with disabilities. And you would dramatically reduce poverty, for a very cheap price of $3.6 billion. That's replacing like existing like tax subsidies and stuff at the federal and like provincial level.
Like, well, there are individuals who could afford that. Like Elon could pay for Canada's net cost for the next 100 years.
right. He could spend 3.6 billion a year to make sure poverty is essentially cut in half in Canada. It's funny. So yeah, in the other news too, and this is they just voted for their new leader, the party leader for the Liberal Party, and we talked about this in a show a couple episodes ago with Mark Carney, and Mark Carney had he didn't use the words basic income, but like he was clearly talking about the issues of automation. He even talked about basically what we just talked about too, in regards to stagnating wages from decades of automation and offshoring, leading to this high inequality. So like he knows these problems and he's spoken about these problems, and he won with like a massively. It was like over 80% of the vote for him in his party. So he'll replace Trudeau, and then they'll have another election. And whereas like when
is that?
Trudeau,
Like, how long
it hasn't been announced yet. Like it's
is it like weeks or years, or
they'll most likely announce their election sometime in like the next month. I think it could even be sooner than that. And then that date will be set, and they'll have that in like a normal like sane amount of time, like the way that so many other countries do this, instead of like announcing instead of having like we do, where you run for like 3 years. But it's interestingly, when Trudeau announced his retirement, it was looking like that their party was going to be beaten, and the Conservatives were going to take over in Canada with like their own kind of version of Trump. And now it doesn't look that way, because Carney is really popular, and the tariffs are extremely unpopular. So you've got this issue of Canadians wanting to fight against Trump, and so they're not going to elect a Trump who's a friend of Trump, because then a friend of Trump is going to be like, oh sure, we'll be the 51st state. So they want someone to fight back against that. So it seems most likely that Mark Carney would win the next election, and be their leader, and in which case he could do something like this plan that PBO has actually put out and proposed, because it's already been like it's done, and it's something with good credentials, and he could say, hey, look, this is what we should do. We know that it works too, because we did the CERB and that worked really well. We can do this. So it's also a good response to the tariffs. Like that's another, I think, a strong argument in Canada is that, okay, well, we're going to see higher prices, and people are going to lose their jobs, and people who keep their jobs, they could lose their incomes. They'll have fewer customers because we'll be able to export less, or people have less money to spend, so then they'll spend less. Like Canada is going to be hurt by this. And the logic, even like Trump keeps saying that he wants them to be the 51st state. Like, oh, if you just do what I want, then you can, not pay any tariffs. You just become the 51st state. You won't, you'll everything will be great. So there's a certain like patriotism behind combating Trump and combating the tariffs. And I think a basic income could really play into that and be like, hey, we want to defend ourselves against Trump. Yeah. We want to make sure. And we talked about that too in a previous episode with like Tom Cooper's op-ed, which is really good along these lines.
Like
it's interesting.
Like the U.S. right now is sort of like the giant spaceships in Independence Day, giving all of the Canadians something to rally together against, and then they'll find their greater natures and heroism. It's funny. I talk a lot about how I've sort of given up I've been very disillusioned by politics, but it's been coming up a lot today. And I mostly check out, and all our projects are apolitical, like big tent, grassroots type things. But but like we've been talking about politicians a lot today, and maybe who's got a little chance of hopefulness. Wolf Gold in the chat says, "What's the deal with AOC?" After we were talking about her, and I haven't really plugged into like exactly what she's doing, but she's always seemed like she's got an openness to this, especially when I have a personal story. When I lived in New York City, I when she was running for Congress before anyone knew who she was for the very first time, and I had never like volunteered for anything ever, and I just got this random email that said this person is running for Congress. It's a really interesting thing. Do you want to go do phone calls? So I did the phone calls. And I'd never done that before. It's a degrading, humiliating process. Like 50% of it, you don't get through to a person, and another 30%, like they're like, this is not who you think lives here, and then no one else speaks English. Like I actually got 0 people to even have a conversation about it. But I volunteered my time for this thing, and then we all went out to a bar, and AOC was there. And she wasn't in the news or anything. And so I just sat there and I talked to her, and I did what I did with everyone at that time. I said, "What do you think about UBI?" And she was actually really smart on it at a time, like back in whatever that was, 2016, 2017, when hardly anyone even knew about it. So like I've long considered her to be a potential ally for things like basic income, despite like any sort of friction she had with the UBI movement during Yang's campaign. So she's one person that I hold a little hope in my heart for.
Yes.
But at the same time, I've given up on waiting for politicians to do things. So
Yeah, and I read AOC mentioned basic income too when she visited New Orleans for one of the conferences there. I have to find that on YouTube. I don't know how quickly I can do that, but maybe I can do that in time. But I wanted to show this part. So another part from Canada. This was part of like their liberal like primary. Was that Karina Gold was one of the people who ran for leadership, and she got like 3% of the vote, but she was considered to be like the most progressive of the liberal candidates, and a lot of people liked her, and she could have some kind of role, in Carney's administration. Which we'll see what happens, but like here's what she said. UBI Works uploaded here when she talked about the basic income plan.
So today I'm here to announce that within 1 year of becoming prime minister, I would bring forward a plan to update our social safety net to really help Canadians, and not just catch them when they fall, but also to enable them to bounce back even stronger than before. And so what does that look like? It means a modernized EI system that actually helps Canadians when in their time of need. It means providing more supports to vulnerable seniors, and it means providing a dignified existence to people with disabilities. And it means setting us on a path towards a basic income in this country. When I think about where we are right now with the threat of tariffs from the United States, that means that we could be in another situation where up to 1 million Canadians lose their jobs, and we do not have the social safety net in place to provide the supports in this moment. And so once again, we would find ourselves in the need to set up something new and ad hoc, when really we should be having a system that can handle the shocks that are coming from outside of Canada, the shocks that could be facing our economy. It's something that we owe Canadians, that comfort, that knowledge, that expectation that when they fall, the government is there not just to catch them, but to ensure that they can rebound even more successfully. I think we have to improve what we have right now to set us on a path for what a basic income could look like. So my commitment is within 1 year to have a modernized system in place, or the path towards it. And then a basic income would require a lot of conversations with the provinces and territories, but to set Canada on that path. Because again, we are a wealthy country. We have done great things. We pretty much have a basic income for children with the Canada Child Benefit, and for seniors with old age security and the guaranteed income supplement. But there are a lot of people who need that support in Canada. So I want to have that conversation and that dialogue with Canadians about what that modernized social safety net would look like.
Still a lot of questions I have, but that's cool. She's talking about it. Like, she's very careful to say a path towards whatever. And to me, that's like, you know, the magic starts happening when you remove certain systemic design choices. So if it's like a very gradual path, like on what side of that design change are we at any one time? Like, you don't, if you just kind of like slightly shift a welfare program without making it like unconditional cash, or without making it universalist or whatever, then I feel like it would be harder for that path to gain traction towards a basic income, because you wouldn't see the effects.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly ways for politicians to talk about it where, you know, they're playing it safe, instead of, you know, saying let's do this immediately, and, you know, they're trying to appear more serious, you know, by saying, oh, well, let's, you know, dip our toes in and whatever.
Mhm.
But I do like in the debate, she mentioned it multiple times, and like she was clearly like the basic income candidate there. And I think it's good that there is a basic income candidate, you know, that was in the Liberal Party, because the Liberal Party grassroots does support this and did make sure that it was uplifted as like a major policy in that party. Like Trudeau was against it, so he never did anything. But with Carney being the new prime minister, there's more possibility that he might actually do something and listen to the grassroots, especially with tariffs and stuff, and maybe she'll have a role in this too.
Do you think, has anyone in the world yet come out as strongly and unapologetically with their platform pro UBI as Yang yet? Is there anyone you would say is like?
I would
So
still just point to
full on?
South Korea. Like the South
Mhm.
Korea, I think is the strongest one. Like he ran strong on basic income, and it's a small basic income to start, you know. So maybe like the basic income party there in South Korea, like they want it to be higher. Their own candidate that they ran, you know, wants like different details and stuff. But like the most likely next president of South Korea is strongly for basic income, like through and through. So that's why I do think that when that election happens and he wins, then there's a very good likelihood that's going to happen.
Is there a date for that one, or are we waiting to find out on that too?
Yeah, because it depends on, you know, the impeachment of their president in regards to like their Supreme Court, you know, booting him out, and then that process would start up the snap election, at which point it would be, I can't remember the timeline, but it could happen, I think, you know, within the next couple months, really. So before we finish, one other thing from Canada that I thought was really interesting that caught my eye here was that the First Nations in Canada, a group there, sued, and it went up to their Supreme Court, and it was sided with them. And so this is like, you know, it's a good example of what, you know, has gone on throughout history, really. And you know, these First Nations signed a treaty with Canada, and were promised that as part of this, like there was the augmentation clause, which is the big deal here, which is that they were promised increased annual payments from time to time as the land generated more wealth. And in pretty soon after that treaty was signed, in 1874, these annual payments were capped at $4 per person and never increased. And so, the lawsuit was like, hey, you owe us money for all of this, all these increases that should have happened since 1874. And, they should be getting annual payments much more than $4 each. So the Supreme Court there said, yeah, this money is owed. And now it's like up to, the provinces or whatever to figure out what that amount should be. And then for them to agree to that and stuff. And Joseph Stiglitz wrote that, it could be like $126 billion that they're owed. And like the offer right now is like $3.6 billion. And they said, no, we don't accept that. So they should get somewhere between, like $4 billion and $100-something billion. And then that's for like back pay. And then going forward, it should be like this higher annual amount. So it's possible, or likely even, I would say, that these First Nations would start getting a basic income, on an annual basis. It's kind of more like the Alaska dividend, for what they should have been getting this entire time, but they didn't. It was stolen from them, against like the treaty that they signed.
Canada once again working things out. I think I'm starting to worry that we're going to get like identified as like a Canadian sleeper cell or something. We're secretly Canadian operatives at work here in the U.S.
And then we'll be like, we're
Enemies
sorry
of the
about
state.
that.
Yeah, we're so sorry. Yeah. I don't know.
Well,
I was just thinking, the California is our population is 41.5 million. Canada is 39 million. So if we, so I'm going to start a movement to like become part of Canada for California to actually secede and immediately go to Canada, become a province. Can you like petition to be a province?
Canadafornia. I mean, that's going to make things weird on Seattle on Oregon and Washington. They might have to also join. So that's a big L.
Oh yeah, might as well. They do it in a second if California did it. So
Yeah.
we're gonna have the Canadian L-shaped country pretty soon.
Yeah. I wanted I know we're getting close to the end. I wanted to just mention like our chat has been really fun today. A lot of people are very active.
Yeah.
So thank you
thanks
for all the people in
chiming
there.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Very cool.
And we are at the end. If you guys wanted to talk about anything before we leave, we can do that. But I don't want to. There's a couple other things I could talk about, but it would be a much longer discussion, so we can hold that for our next episode.
Yeah, and I've had
We
to
gotta
pee for
pace
like
ourselves.
45 minutes now. So
Okay.
let's call it.
All right. Well, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for watching today. This episode will be up sometime in the next week. When it's uploaded, please like and subscribe. Share the video with your networks, and help us grow the channel by making sure people know that the show exists. If they're interested in learning about basic income news, we record these. We try to record these every other week on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to check it out live, that's when we do these. And yeah, just thanks so much for
Yes.
watching this.
There is still civilized discord to be had here.
Civilized
This-
Discord. That's a funny
Discourse,
Freudian slip.
yeah. Whoops.
Civilized Discord.
Actually, maybe that is more accurate.
That's just like sports.
Right.
Sports in general.
Hmm.
If people
All
aren't
right.
following. Okay.
All right, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.